We're going to be in Genesis chapter 39. So again, I'm going to just preface this by saying we're doing the 40 days of prayer, and last week we jumped into the story of Joseph. A lot of it is because Pastor Joe loves the story of Joseph and always has wanted to preach on it. But also because the story of Joseph, a lot of people say, is in parallel with the story of Jesus, the life of Jesus. And so we can see a lot of similarities there of how he as you read the text, we don't see really Joseph falling into sin. We know that he sinned, but he was a sinner. He was a man like us, but he was thrown into this pit, and God raised him up. We so many other places where he raised him up to authority, royalty, a place sitting at the right hand of Pharaoh, in a sense. He saved many lives, it says in, I think, Genesis 41. So there's a lot of parallels there. A persecution came on Joseph, just like it came on Jesus, from his own family, from his brothers and sisters, in a sense. So there's a lot of parallels in this story. And also, there's a lot of life lessons that you and I can take away from this. And we're using this kind of diagram over here to help us remember this story. And I'm going to come back to this today and unpack it a little more for us. And again, I'm going to save maybe something for the second service to hopefully get Lois to stick around. All right, let's jump in. And my notes are over here. So, have you ever been singing one of those Christian songs like "I Surrender All" and feel like you're the biggest hypocrite on the face of the earth? Has anybody ever felt like that before? No, I'm the only one. All right, Chris, our worship leader, has felt like that too. Praise the Lord. Okay, we're in a good spot. And so I have at times felt like this, like, oh man, Lord, like I don't live this out. I'm gonna just kind of pull up some of these verses. All to Jesus I surrender. Here's the lyrics. All to Jesus I surrender. All to Jesus I freely give. I will ever love, ever, forever. That means always. Okay? Love and trust you. In your presence, daily I live. Not to say that's impossible to live out, but it's something that I find myself struggling with daily. Like, I struggle in the sense of freely giving. Here's the reason why. I'll just give you a simple example in my life. And this is, I'm supposed to be a good steward of the resources that God has given me, correct? Okay? And so one of the values of the Alliance, and kind of fits into one of our values here, which is living family, or knowing Jesus, you could say even, it fits into that value, is everything we have belongs to God. We are only his stewards. And when I am a steward of something, I'm a manager of it. Okay, I'm taking care of it. This is something that is precious to me. My body is precious to me. I only get one of them. Okay? And so my heart doctor, you all know I had a heart problem about a year ago, and I still got that heart problem. The ramifications of what happened to my heart valve is now going to affect me the rest of my life. So I go to my doctor. She says, Joe, you need to lose 10 pounds, at least 10 pounds. I want to see, next time I see you in 3 months, 10 pounds. And so me and Steve have talked about this multiple times. He did 5. I lost 0. And so Steve has lost more than me, and I've lost 0 pounds, and freely surrendering to this, like the cookies in the fridge, or the cookie dough, and freely surrendering, like saying, Jesus, I give you all of my life, even this area of my body, being a good steward of it, like, but that ice cream is really good. And so, when my doctor says like, hey, you got to lay low on the carbs, I end up going out to dinner and getting a pasta dinner. Like, these are my struggles, okay? These are struggles of mine. So when I come across a verse like this, and if I'm like saying, if I'm really honest, I'm like, all to Jesus I surrender. Yes, Lord. All to Jesus I kind of give, Lord. I kind of give to you. Like in certain areas of my life that I feel comfortable giving, but that other area that I don't want to stop eating those cookies at night, and I don't want to stop eating that ice cream, and that pasta's just been in my life for too long, and I just can't freely give that to you. Like, I struggle. Like, these are areas that I'm supposed to be a good steward over in my life, but I find myself constantly going back to this well of sin, this dry well, and this well that is not life-giving. And I don't find myself going to the well that gives eternal life, where Jesus says at the end, he was hungry and he was tired and he sat down by a well with a woman and he walks away and he says, I'm good. I got food you know nothing about. This has filled me. And so I find myself continuing whenever I say I surrender to you, Jesus. I find that there is always something crouching at the door. The sin is always lurking in the shadow. The next fall is right there around the corner because I'm just not surrendering all to Jesus. Now, I can walk away really defeated right now, and this is, but the question that I'm really trying to, the dilemma I'm trying to put us all in right now is the simple fact that surrendering is very hard. It's very hard, but we can do it. We can do it. We really can. Like, I can be a good steward over the resources I've given myself, but I'm not doing something that causes me then to fall into this trap of sin. I'm not doing something that I need to be doing, and which is leading me down this trail that would lead me to disobeying or not obeying God and living out the will of my Father. I'm not doing something. Something's wrong. And something's wrong in us if we find ourselves constantly struggling with the same thing over and over and over again. Now, we would love to say, well, Lord, like God knows what I struggle with, and this is just the thorn in my side, the cross that I have to bear. We're misinterpreting Scripture right there, and we're misappropriating it, and we're using it so that way we can have our sinful desires still. And so what I would like to unpack for us today in the story of Joseph is how was Joseph able to, in the place and the life that he was living, in the circumstances that he experienced, how was he able to still surrender? How was he able to still experience this surrendered life to God? So let's take a look at verses 1 to 3. I'm already off my notes, so we're just going to keep going through it verse by verse. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. Now, I want to just stop right there and just say something about where God placed Joseph. He placed Joseph in a house of a man he was the captain of the guard. He had a high-ranking position, okay? He was someone somehow had line to royalty, line to Pharaoh. Like, this is wild. He's sold into slavery, the worst place. He's thrown into a pit, a cistern, then sold off and traded and gone. Done. Gonna go to Egypt, probably just be a slave. Here's the crazy thing is that the Egyptians hated Hebrews. They despised them. They thought they were so disgusting that we even read later on that Joseph, the Egyptians, couldn't even eat with the Hebrews at the table when they gave them the feast. And so Hebrews were so despised, they were like with the same way in which Hebrews looked at the Gentiles, like dogs. And so this is wild that he would even end up in a position, a place where he would have some type of connection to royalty, someone who was a captain. Now, the other thing is that Potiphar, many people say that, he had a wife, we know this, but in his position, this high-ranking official in for Pharaoh, he was actually might have been a eunuch. Now, if you don't know what a eunuch is, it's a male who has castrated themselves so they can serve the king in whichever way they need to serve. Now, this could have led to some of the things that we'll read later on in the chapter about Potiphar's wife, but it also reminds me that this man was full, and if he wasn't, we know that this man was fully devoted to his position of being one of Pharaoh's officials. And so this is a high-ranking person who has aligned to Pharaoh, who is aligned to, in a sense, you could say, royalty, and Joseph ends up in his house. And the beautiful thing we see in verse 2 is the Lord was with Joseph. He was with him. He was with Joseph. Even in this place, this faraway land, this place of where he was a slave, probably the lowest slave in the house, he was the new guy on the block, God was with him. And he lived in the house, and he ended up, it says in verse 3, when his master saw that the Lord was with him, that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes, that's Potiphar's, and he became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household and entrusted to his care everything that he owned. From the time he put in charge of his household and all that he'd owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had to Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except for the food he ate. Here's something really interesting about this passage is when we look at it, like the Lord gave Joseph success. And God gave him favor in the eyes of Potiphar. We see blessing upon blessing coming from Joseph or resulting in in his home. Now, the Egyptians, you have to know something about the Egyptians. The Egyptians saw blessing as good fortune. And so you were blessed by God if you had money, okay? Or if money came your way. So, or if you kept on being like climbing in rank. Now, we know that's not necessarily specifically true. You might not have great fortune in your life. You might not climb the ranks of some corporate ladder, but in the Egyptians' mind, that was the blessing of God, the favor of God in your life. We know that's not true, that if you're only blessed by God if you climb up in ranks, because we look at Jesus. He was a homeless man. Like, he didn't climb any ranks. He was murdered. Like, if that was the case, Jesus would have became the high priest. And so there's a difference in understanding of, like, the Egyptians' philosophy. That was their understanding. To be honest, that's partially this American culture that we live in too. That you're blessed if you have lots of money. And we celebrate this today. And so we have to understand that God's favor is upon you, whether or not you are in some wealthy position or not, some place of authority or not. Okay? God's favor can still be upon you. We have to understand also that God uses cultures to bring about his purposes. Now, let me help us understand that. What I'm saying is, when we look at the Egyptians, he placed Joseph there in the Egyptian culture, gave Potiphar in his home prosperity. He helped them benefit. So he used the enemies, like people who are not of God, people who are not for God, and used them for his purposes. God uses whatever he wants for whatever he desires for his purposes, not ours. So God can use the worst of the worst. So to be honest with you, we got our election coming up this year. Those things are good and great and important. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's in office, because guess what God can do? He can use that person too for his purpose. And so for us to rack our minds over something, no. You get to cast your vote, and this is the place where you and I have the opportunity to step into our culture and have a voice. But at the end of the day, God's going to do whatever he wants to do. And he did whatever he wanted to do. He took a slave and brought him up to be in charge of Potiphar's house, who is the captain of the guard for Pharaoh. That's pretty powerful. God will use you and bring you up in the places where he has you, if he wants to use you for whatever purpose he has for you. Here's the other thing we can't forget. God gave Joseph a beautiful dream. A beautiful dream. That he was one day going to be raised up and his brothers were going to bow down to him. Now, I am sure that dream did not leave Joseph's mind or heart. I am sure he was probably unbelievably discouraged and frustrated, but I'm sure he did not forget about it. Because if you're to be honest with yourself, and you know that God spoke something to you, have you forgotten about that? I have not forgotten about that. No matter what my situation may look like, I have not forgotten about that. Nor will I ever forget about that. I have to always remember that God can do whatever he wants to do in whoever's life he wants to do it in. And so that dream is probably still sitting in the belly of Joseph. And here's the beautiful thing. Joseph, guess what he did? He worked as though he was working unto the Lord. God was with Joseph even in Egypt, even in Potiphar's home, even as a slave. God was with him because Joseph remained faithful. And this is what we talked about. You and I, the only way that we can really simply live out the dreams that God has called us to live is by living out the faith that we have in God and believing that he's first in my life. I must trust in him. Let's continue on. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he's entrusted to me, my care. No one is greater in the house than I am. So we see now his position, his authority, where he's been brought up to. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Now, let's look at this again. Again, we could assume many things, that Potiphar might have been a eunuch. She might have been kind of a woman that was starving for affection, and she was looking for it in Joseph. But the text really doesn't say that. What does it say? That he was well-built and handsome. He's a good-looking guy, okay? And he was attractive to people in Egypt. Women. And so he is this leader in this home, and people could either usually be attracted to one or two things, or one of a few things. One is physical appearance, okay? Or they could be attracted to even authority and power, okay? Or success. And so we see people constantly drawn to that. We see the person in high position. People are drawn to that. Ooh, I want to. Ooh, wow! They walked in the room. Everybody look. They walked in the room. Like, we're attracted to that. We're attracted to the good-looking person. It's a funny thing. I had a student tell me about TikTok when it first came out. He's like, Mr. Serratelli, I'll tell you what TikTok is. It's the girls who look the prettiest on it. They get the most followers. That's it. And I'm like, that's true. Social media sometimes is all about the best looking people saying whatever they want to say or posting pictures of themselves, and they get plenty of followers. And that's sad. This is what our culture is. But the bottom line is, an unbeliever, that's what they're after. And she was after Joseph's his physical appearance. The beautiful thing here is as temptation came and prowled around like a roaring lion, as the enemy was trying to take out Joseph, Joseph simply says a few things, and one thing that's really important for us. He recognizes what God is doing, that God is raising him up to a beautiful position. But two, he says, how could I do this wicked thing? This wicked thing. In verse 9. This is a wicked thing. Sin, sexual immorality is a wicked thing. Adultery is a wicked thing. And to be honest with you, too many times we look at sin and we'll give excuse to it, and we don't see it as a wicked thing. This would not only have been satisfying his needs, okay? This could have satisfied his needs for a moment, or her needs, but this would have been sinning against another person too. This would have affected Potiphar and his whole entire home. This is a wicked thing. And Joseph recognized that any sin is wicked. I got to tell you one thing, and I think in our culture that we don't in our church, and I'm saying just our church, the church, we've given allowance to sin for too long. And we sing songs like, I surrender all, but we really know that I'm not surrendering that though. I'm allowed to have that in my life. No, it's wicked. It's wicked. But also, it is a direct and blatant sin, rebellion against God. Like, we are rebelling against God. We are turning our back on him in that moment where we gratify our sinful flesh. Joseph recognized this. This is why we see over and over and again We see 4 times the Lord was with him, the Lord was with him, the Lord was with him, the Lord was with him. We see over and over again, the Lord was with him. A big question we have to ask ourselves is, we feel like the Lord is with what is not with us? What sin, what might we be stepping into? What sin might we be giving allowance for that might create this disconnect between us and God? We see it so simply in the story of Adam and Eve. As soon as when they bite the apple, what do? They run and hide from the presence of God. And so this wicked thing, rebellion against God, sinning against God, I promise you, even though God will be right there, you will run and hide because of the shame and guilt that you will feel. And you will not experience the success that we also desire. You know, I get to do, as a pastor, we get to do marriage counseling a lot with people, and you could, and like, listen, so I go through it a lot in my marriage too, like just learning how to counsel myself through it. When I don't see the marriage that I want, I can easily revert back to sin that I've committed. Maybe attitude, unforgiveness, bitterness, jealousy, anger, all of those things that might well up in me and I might take out on my wife as a result, limits us from having the successful marriage that we desire. And I'm not saying success based upon the world standards of money and rank. I'm saying peace and love and harmony and unity and submission unto one another. I want that. I want that. And so when we jump into this text, we can see this didn't happen to Joseph just one time either. She didn't ask him to go to bed one time. This happened what? Day after day. Day after day. The sin in your life, or the temptation of sin in your life, guess what? How often it will be there? Day after day. It will always be there. We live in a sinful world. A place in which we just happen to constantly live, where sin will constantly be lurking at your door. The enemy will constantly be prowling around like a roaring lion, looking to devour you. Day after day. And does the enemy know where you're weak? Of course he does. He knows exactly where you struggle. Day after day. So can I ask you, how does a man, we could see, I could hear in my mind many of stories or many of conversations or even many of times in my own heart where I've said, just this once. Just this once, I'm going to give in to this moment. And I do, or we do. And the feeling that I get after, the day after day, I'm just going to gratify this sinful desire. I'm just going to say this because I need to. I'm tired of it. Day after day. How can someone stand under pressure like that? This is the struggle of us all, right? When we hear songs like I Surrender All, like, Lord, you don't know. That ice cream is calling to me from the fridge. I make light of it, but it's true. How many times am I going to constantly give an excuse for my sin? And so I look at the story of Joseph, and I'm like, this man was rejected by his family. He was thrown into a pit. They were going to murder him. Instead, out of the compassion of his brother Judah, they sell him into slavery. They rip off his cloak, this cloak that he loved so much, his identity as a son. They rip that, they steal that from him, sell him into slavery. He now becomes somebody else's possession, but he still worshiped God. He still worshiped God. God was still with him. If anybody had an excuse, it seems like Joseph would have had an excuse, but he didn't. He continued to be faithful even no matter where he was. Let's look at verse 11. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called to her servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew," this evil word in the Greek, the way they pronounce it, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and he ran out of the house." You know, when I look at this part right here, this is the story, even the first few verses, verse 11 and 12. This is the excuse, right? I got caught. I was just doing my normal thing. I was doing my normal routine, and all of a sudden, the enemy caught me. At a moment of weakness, the enemy got to me. Like, it's the excuse that we all give, and here it is. She caught him. There was like no avoiding it. Day after day, she constantly, but I'm sure there was other people around. There's other ways that he could have got out of it. And instead, this one, he had to do one thing. Run. Get away from this. Flee from sexual immorality. But instead, another lie is created. Now, not by his brothers, but by the person and the home that he's been caring for years. He's loving them and caring for them. And all of a sudden, this family, this people that he's belonging to, that he's giving everything to, devises another lie. Steals his cloak, his clothing. Again, identity stolen from him. A lie created, and now is thrown into prison. Let's continue on. When his master heard this story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him, put him into prison, the place where the king's prison were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all of those held in the prison. He was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Now, I got to be honest with you. I would be unbelievably frustrated. Do you know the language that most people would use here? Right here in this text, when this would happen, they would use something like this. "Lord," they would say this prayer, "Lord, this isn't fair. This isn't fair, God. Look at all that I've been doing for you. Look at how faithful I've been. This isn't fair. You want to know the big problem with that? The big problem with prayers like that and expecting something in return to God, that means simply this. Your relationship with God is what? It's conditional. It's conditional. And I got to be honest with you. To even think like that is so ludicrous. It's crazy to think that as we go to God and go, God, I've done all this for you. Look at how faithful I've been. God, it's just not fair the way this has happened. The story is not scripted the way that I want it to be scripted or the way it should be scripted. Now, that language, I guarantee you, has probably come out of maybe it hasn't come out of your mouth, but you're probably thinking it in your heart and mind at times. Because I got to be honest, like I've thought it at times too. It's just not fair. It's just not fair. And Joseph, instead of thinking, God, this is a conditional relationship, instead had a different position again. Resting in this faith that he had, in his identity is not in his position, where his house is, where his head lies, how much he whether that dream comes true or not, even though it probably burned within him inside, his job was to simply yield to the Father in faith. And believe in this beautiful message. Here's another thing I want to point out to you is look in verse 2 and 3. We see this. He's in Egypt. He's with Potiphar and his household. It says this, the Lord was with him, so he prospered Joseph. Verse 3, when his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success. Look at verse 21. The Lord was with him, and he showed kindness and granted favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Verse 23, the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with him and gave him what? Success. The Lord can give you favor in the eyes of God when we are with God. God will give you success when you are with God. Not success the way that you want, but success according to God's purposes and God's standard. And this is what I want to mainly talk to us about today. I know my message is almost wrapping up, I promise. But I want to talk to us about how do we actually live this life that is truly surrendered to the will of God. So, I believe that there's 3 ways that you and I could live a surrendered life. And just so you know, I found a beautiful devotional that helped us probably appropriate this well for us to apply. What does surrendered truly mean to us today? And so, because this, I got to be honest, sometimes this is really good. This could be really good at times, right? I believe in the gospel message. I believe in reconciliation. I believe in the story of the cross that Jesus died for my sin. I get to identity. I rest in his identity. And then you know what? It gets cloudy again here at times. For me to then start obeying the way faithfully, where I am saying to Jesus, I freely give to you. I surrender all. I truly surrender all. Wait, Lord, you want to take that? Okay, Lord, you can take that too. Lord, I'm in this workplace. I know my heart desires this, Lord, but this is where you have me. Okay, Lord, I'm going to faithfully serve here. I'm going to faithfully live here. This starts to get really hard to do. Surrendered life is really difficult. It's really difficult. Okay? And Oswald Chambers says there's 3 ways that you and I should focus on or understand a surrendered life should look like. 1 is deliverance. That you and I should experience surrendered life is for deliverance. So that you and I could come to him when we say that, Lord, I am weary and I am burdened. And we will trust in his rest. And so like the practicality of what does surrender, how do we apply that? It's so that we can experience the rest of God. And so he says this, it is after we have begun to experience what salvation means that we surrender our wills to Jesus for rest. Your will is a very difficult thing to surrender. This is the area of like where we simply say, I voluntarily come to you. Like I voluntarily give you my life. I surrender this so that you could deliver me. Too many times we go to deliverance for deliverance in other places, like books, friends, the girl who will listen to me, my neighbor, my wife, my spouse, whatever you want to say, okay? Drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, all of those other things, we look for the relaxation that we feel, the deliverance that we will experience. We have to really surrender that Jesus truly will give you rest. He will truly take upon your burdens. I had this conversation with, I just went up to John Stumbo, the president of the Alliance. He was at our district not too long ago. And I just said to him, he made a really big decision to like kind of lead a conversation in our district. And I said to him, I don't know how you do and carry the burden that you carry of a whole entire denomination on your shoulder. He says, I don't have to. He carries it for me. He surrendered that Jesus will deliver me from this burden that I'm in. I'm sure Joseph said the same thing. Lord, I'm burdened right now. Can you give me rest? Another thing is that we would surrender for devotion. In Matthew 16:24, Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Jesus desired a surrendered life, but meaning like this. Jesus desired for you and I to worship him and him alone. Not yourself, not anything else, to worship him and only him. This means simply the circumstances of your life are not the things that you and I are devoted to. We're not devoted to the bank account. We're not devoted to the job. We're not devoted to the relationships. We're devoted to who? Him. Just him alone. So when I surrender, I'm surrendering him to him, all of it. My devotion, my worship is to him, not to anything else. And you and I are surrendered to die. You and I are surrendered to die. Peter and Jesus have a conversation. I don't know if you remember it. It's where Jesus and Peter get in this thing, and Jesus says, do you love me? And then he asks him this same question 3 times. And then he basically says to him, feed my sheep. And Peter gets off track a little bit. He's like, well, what about this guy? And he's talking about John. Like, what about him? What's going on with him? He says to Peter, hey, relax. Okay? Relax. He says, but you, he says, verse 18 in John 21, he says, very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone will dress you and lead you. And Jesus said this to what? To help him understand the death that he will experience. That he has to truly die. His plan, him jumping on the Jesus train, leads to the cross, just like Jesus' life did. And then you have to decide, do I want to be on that train? I guarantee you sometimes, like, When you're leading someone to Christ, you don't want to say, hey man, I just want to let you know, like the decision you're making today, you have to die to all your dreams, desires, and plans, and you have to follow Jesus. He's going to ask you to like leave your brother and sister and follow him. Every relationship in your life is dying. And you know what? And if people come and speak to you and speak against you and maybe even kill you, you have to proclaim Jesus's, like your confession in Christ over your own life. Can you do that? I guarantee you they will walk away. At the same time, there's, I think, a lot of us who are now further down the road and we're like, I couldn't imagine doing anything else than choosing Jesus over these temporal things of the world. Something eternal over something so, it doesn't make sense. How could I not? So when I put into perspective what a surrendered life really looks like, what I'm really gaining from it, how could I not surrender? How could I not? Father, let your will be done. Let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Amen? God, we just pray that